I thought love was enough. I thought the woman I married wanted me, not my wallet. But the night I opened my bank account and saw it drain dry, I realized the truth. My wife never loved me. She used me. Every gift, every smile, every kiss was bought with my money. She thought I'd stay weak, that I'd watch her walk away with everything I'd worked for. But she forgot one thing. I didn't build my life by being stupid. She used me for money, and I was going to make her pay in full. I was 58 when I met Claire. I wasn't rich, not in the way people imagine. No yachts, no mansions. But I had worked my hands raw for 35 years, saving, investing carefully, building a modest but comfortable life. A 2-story house in the suburbs, a decent retirement account, and enough in the bank to know I wouldn't die hungry. I thought that would be enough for both of us. She came into my life like a storm I didn't see coming. Blonde hair, sharp smile, eyes that locked onto you like you were the only man in the room. She was 10 years younger, and she made me feel like I was 20 years younger, too. At first I thought I'd won the lottery. The way she laughed at my old jokes, the way she touched my hand when we walked down the street, the way she leaned close at dinner and said she'd never met a man as strong and dependable as me. For a man my age, you don't hear words like that often. They sink deep. They make you feel alive again. I remember the first time she hinted at money. It was subtle. We were at a steakhouse, one of those places where the wine list is thicker than the Bible. She looked at the menu, frowned and said, "Someday I'd love to just order whatever I want without checking the price first." I laughed, pulled out my card and told her, "Tonight, you can." She smiled like I'd just handed her the world. It didn't seem strange then. I thought I was being generous. Isn't that what a man does when he loves his wife? He provides. He protects. But generosity turned into expectation. A year into our marriage, the shopping trips began. New clothes, new shoes, new jewelry. At first, she showed me everything she bought, twirling in the living room like a teenager, asking, "Don't I look pretty?" I'd smile, nod, tell her she was beautiful. Because she was, but soon the bags stopped coming home with her. The statements showed charges at boutiques I'd never even heard of. Thousands of dollars gone in a single afternoon. When I asked her, she'd tilt her head, eyes wide, voice soft. "Oh, honey, it was just a little treat. Don't you want me to look good for you?" How do you argue with that? I let it slide, over and over again, until the first time I saw her face when I said no. We were in a jewelry store. She wanted a necklace, a diamond pendant that cost more than my first car. I told her we couldn't afford it. Her smile dropped. Her eyes turned cold. She didn't yell, didn't make a scene. She just stared at me like I was nothing, like I'd betrayed her. And for the first time I saw it, the hunger in her eyes. Not for me, for what I could buy her. From that day on, everything changed. Dinners out turned into battles. If I didn't order the most expensive wine, she pouted. Vacations turned into competitions with her friends, who had the nicer resort, the better photos. She didn't want a husband. She wanted a sponsor. Still, I tried to convince myself it was love. I'd worked all my life. Why not let her enjoy it? Why not let her have what I never did? But love doesn't empty your soul the way she did. I found the first hidden account 2 years into the marriage. A joint card I never used with $12,000 in charges at high-end stores. When I confronted her, she cried, wrapped her arms around me, told me she felt insecure, that spending made her feel worthy. She turned her guilt into my sympathy, and like a fool I believed her. I paid it off. But in the back of my mind, something cracked. The man I was before her, proud, careful, grounded, started to slip away. I became smaller, quieter, always calculating how much I could give without losing everything. And she became bolder, greedier. By the time our third anniversary came, my savings had shrunk to half. Half a lifetime's work, gone in shopping bags and empty promises. I'd sit on the porch at night, staring at the house I built, wondering if one day even that would disappear. And that's when the thought first crossed my mind. What if she wasn't just careless? What if she married me for this exact reason? What if love was never part of her plan? The idea chilled me. But deep down, I already knew the truth. And the night I came home to find another $20,000 missing from my account, replaced by a diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist, I made a silent vow. If she wanted to use me for money, then money would be the very thing that destroyed her. I always believed the slow bleed was worse than the quick wound. Claire didn't stab me all at once. She carved away at me slice by slice until the man I used to be was barely recognizable. The spending grew bolder. Vacations turned into status trips. A week in Mexico wasn't enough. It had to be a 5-star resort, a private villa with champagne waiting at every meal. I'd sit by the pool in my faded swim trunks, watching her pose for photos in designer bikinis, her phone buzzing with comments from friends who envied her life. Our life, except it wasn't ours. It was mine, and she flaunted it as if she'd earned it. When I asked if we could cut back just a little, her smile twisted. Why do you have to ruin everything? Do you want people to think you can't take care of your wife? The words hit harder than fists. At my age, a man's pride isn't in how fast he can run or how much weight he can lift. It's in the roof he keeps over his family's head, the dignity of being a provider. She knew exactly where to strike, and I let her. Every time. But money has a way of showing you the truth when love blinds you. One night, I went to log into my retirement account. I hadn't touched it since we married. I figured if I kept that sacred, at least I'd have a future. The balance was lower, much lower, withdrawals I never authorized. My stomach dropped. The next morning, I confronted her. She didn't even flinch. Oh, that? Honey, I just borrowed a little. We needed upgrades. The kitchen is outdated. The furniture's old. Don't you want a home we can be proud of? I stared at her, words choking in my throat. That was my retirement. My security. She rolled her eyes, walked past me with her coffee cup. You'll make more. You always do. Stop being dramatic. It wasn't just the money she was draining. It was my soul. Weeks later, I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to a friend, laughing. Oh, Robert, please. He's like an open checkbook. He doesn't even notice half the time. I just smile, cry a little if I have to. And he folds. Those words carved me open. I stood in the hallway, hand pressed against the wall, listening to my wife describe me not as a husband, not as a man she loved, but as a bank account. A fool. That night, when she came to bed, I couldn't even look at her. But she curled against me, kissed my shoulder, whispered, I love you. And I lay there in the dark, wondering how many times she'd said those words while thinking only of the next thing she'd buy. The worst part, I almost believed her anyway. But lies have a weight, and eventually they crush you. The breaking point came the day she invited her friends over for brunch. She paraded them through the house like it was her empire. Robert just redid the floors for me. Look at this chandelier. Custom. He doesn't mind. He loves to spoil me. Her friends giggled, sipping champagne she'd bought with my money. One of them whispered loud enough for me to hear, You're so lucky. I wish my husband was like that. Lucky. I stood in my own kitchen pouring coffee, feeling like a guest in my own life. I caught my reflection in the window, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. A man who had built everything only to watch it be stripped away by the woman who swore to love him. Later that afternoon, after her friends left, I finally snapped. I'm not your ATM. Claire, I said, my voice shaking. "I'm your husband." Or at least I thought I was. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Don't be ridiculous. You think too much." "No," I said, louder now. "I think just enough. You've been bleeding me dry. You don't care about me. You care about what I can buy you." Her eyes flicked up then, sharp as knives. "So what if I do? Isn't that what marriage is? You provide, I keep you company. Be grateful someone like me even looked at you." The words knocked the air from my chest. She said them with such casual cruelty, as if my years of sacrifice, my decades of hard work, were nothing but a joke to her. And then she walked out of the room, heels clicking against the floor, leaving me standing in silence. That night I sat at the dining table alone, staring at the bills stacked in front of me, my savings dwindling, my retirement fractured, my dignity shattered. Something inside me hardened. For months I'd been sinking, watching her take, watching her laugh, watching her treat my life's work like play money. But as I stared at those numbers, a thought rooted itself in my mind. If she saw me as a bank, then maybe it was time to close the account. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make her pay. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and old carpet, but to me it smelled like sanctuary. Temporary, thin, but mine for the moment. I spread the receipts, bank statements, and screenshots across the rickety table and let myself breathe. The papers were just paper. They could be copied, cataloged, and used. That was the new truth. I was no longer a man who reacted. I was a man who prepared. For months I'd been playing the role she wanted. Quiet, embarrassed, a beaten provider who stayed out of the way while Claire lived the life she wanted. It had worked for her to a point. People like simple stories. A man who provides and a woman who enjoys it is safer for them to believe than the messy alternative. But the advantage of staying small was that she stopped watching me closely. She let her guard down in ways arrogance always does. The first break came because of a careless clerk at a boutique. He deposited a return at the wrong register, which resulted in an emailed receipt that showed a refund to an account name that didn't match our household. Small mistake, but perfection is brittle and the brittle cracks. I printed the email, circled the account name, and felt the old muscle memory kick in. The feeling of a problem my hands could solve. I wasn't a tech wizard, but I knew who could help. An old client from my small contracting days owed me a favor and still ran a small consulting shop for people who liked to keep things private. Met him in a diner 2 towns over so nobody would recognize the awkward silhouette of my life mashed into a booth. "You owe me one," he said, sliding me coffee and a pitying look. "What is it?" I told him the story. I left nothing out. The way her laugh had changed. That phone call I'd overheard in a restaurant. The night I found the deed in the drawer. He didn't blink. He handed me a business card and a line I'd heard 100 times in the world of men who fix problems. Follow the money. So we followed it. I learned to read transactions the way I used to read blueprints. Lines that looked ordinary until you knew what the hidden marks meant. Transfers to shell companies that only existed on paper. Payments that lined up with weekends she claimed to be at charity events. Consulting fees paid to a name I'd never heard in my life. Each little line was a breadcrumb leading back to her. The more I found, the angrier I became. But anger, I reminded myself, could make you clumsy. Claire had used my temper to her advantage before. I couldn't let it be the instrument of my ruin now. I cataloged everything like a man preparing a case for a job he had to get right. I photographed documents, scanned receipts, saved emails, and encrypted them onto a thumb drive I hid in the lining of the old toolbox in the storage unit I'd rented under an assumed name. Paranoia had a practical side. You do not keep your life's hope on a laptop at home when the person you married knows where you hide the spare key. While I worked, I watched her. Watching is a different kind of labor, boring, patient, but valuable. I learned her little rituals. She drank coffee at the same cafe on Tuesdays, always asked for almond milk and a lemon tart. She took her calls outside, pacing in the sun, and sometimes she left her car running for a few minutes while she darted back into the shop. Once, when she was at a book club, she left her bag on the back of her chair and walked to the restroom. I slipped in, fingers shaking, and rifled it. There were loyalty cards, a lipstick I didn't recognize, and beneath a receipt, a folded business card for a local notary who did mobile work. I snapped a photo. Mobile notaries are for people who don't want to leave a trace. That was the kind of person Claire was becoming. The kind who thinks there's always another hand to help her hide evidence. I worked my old connections quietly. My friend at the bank, David, gave me coaching on how to request transaction histories without screaming fraud. My former colleague, Marianne, smuggled me a copy of a ledger she'd been politely asked to audit and left in a folder on her desk. Too embarrassed to confront the woman she knew socially. People loathed conflict, but they loved fairness, and once the first whisper of doubt touched them, they wanted to help the wronged man. We began to map the network. A consulting fee here, a gift there, a payment to a shell company in a neighboring county that forwarded money to Claire's card. The map had names and dates, and it began to have motive. She didn't just spend money. She was making investments in a life that would exist without me. A brand new apartment downtown, a business that could launder cash for her lifestyle, friends who owed favors in the right places. She had built an infrastructure, and it could be dismantled. But the most dangerous discovery came from an unlikely source. My son's ex-wife, Anna. Family rifts are messy things, and in the months after our troubles began, gossip had spread. Anna sent me a text one morning, short and panicked. She had been deposing, her word, some receipts as part of a civil proceeding at her work, and ran into a transaction that had my name linked to a particular account. She recognized the handwriting on a memo as Claire's. "I don't want to get involved," she wrote, "but this looks wrong." She attached a photo. I stared at the image until the edges blurred. There it was, the same shorthand Claire used when jotting notes. Use fund, keep quiet. I backed up the file immediately and called David. "We've got a name," he said on the other end. "Get me everything you can. Don't confront her." Not yet. This is where patience showed up as my greatest weapon. People who think themselves secure grow sloppy. They leave copies in drawers, they use old keys, they reuse passwords. Claire had done all of those things in subtle, cocky ways. She'd assumed I was too stunned to notice. She wasn't arrogant enough to think I'd fight, only that I wouldn't fight effectively. She had underestimated how much muscle a man accumulates when he spends a lifetime building. You don't learn finance in a weekend, but you build an instinct for where the seams are. I began to circulate innocuous rumors. Nothing pointed, nothing accusatory. A conversation at the hardware store about unexpected bills. A neutral question to a neighbor about whether anyone else had noticed unusual deliveries. These small seeds didn't scream accusation. They did something subtler. They loosened the social glue that had kept her story intact. People started glancing when she said something that didn't add up. Friends of hers who had accepted lavish brunch invitations began to look embarrassed when the topic veered toward financial responsibility. One night, Claire unplugged her phone to charge downstairs. She left it on the coffee table. I didn't touch it. I nearly did, but I didn't need to. She'd left a backup copy of a draft email in the drafts folder, an email intended for a lawyer, which laid out a plan to transfer part of my retirement to a shell, to secure funds for our future. It was explicit enough. If we act fast, the draft read, we can shield assets before he even sees the paper trail. It was exactly the kind of smoking gun a judge respects. Instead of screenshots, I copied the metadata using a little trick David's tech friend taught me. Export, timestamp, original IP. Evidence isn't just what's said. It's how it was said and when and where. As my folder thickened, a new thought entered the plan. Public pressure. Paper alone was powerful, but people still judge with their eyes and ears. If I could get a few community members, people who'd known me for decades, to ask questions in public forums, the facade she had built would crack faster. It was delicate work. No one likes to accuse in public without grounds. But when a few respected voices begin to ask for clarity about a charity's finances or a volunteer treasurer's reports, others notice. I was careful. We planted concerns like seeds, let them sprout into doubt. The turning point came in the least cinematic way possible, a subpoena. David had been working quietly with a sympathetic prosecutor who didn't like rich people using the court as a way to rewrite reality. When the subpoena arrived at the shell company's registered address, someone at the office called Claire. I watched from a car 2 blocks away as she picked up the phone and laughed. Too loud, too bright. Overconfidence dooms people. She was so convinced the papers would protect her. She couldn't imagine a world where they didn't. They did protect her for a little while, until the investigators dug into the hosting records for the shell company and found out it all pointed right back to an IP that resolved to the little townhouse Claire had rented downtown. The digital trail is a patient, cruel witness. You can move money through dozens of accounts, but you leave breadcrumbs. And anyone who thinks the internet is a dark place where people can act without consequence hasn't met accountants who enjoy tracing the ghosts of fraud. The day they executed a search warrant at her townhouse, I felt an odd mixture of triumph and emptiness. Triumph because the story I'd been telling to myself for months about being used, about being dimmed, had begun to flip. Emptiness because nothing filled the wound of betrayal. Standing outside the police tape, I allowed myself to breathe for the first time in months. A friend from church, the one I'd never expected to be on my side, took my hand and squeezed. "You did the right thing," he said simply. Inside the townhouse, they found receipts she'd hidden in shoeboxes, copies of forged invoices, and the mobile notary log showing dates that matched when she'd told neighbors she was out for book club. They found purchases charged to, accounts set up in names of friends who didn't know their names had been used. In a desk drawer under a frayed calendar, they found the backup thumb drive I'd feared she'd keep. The investigators smiled in that detached way professionals do when the puzzle finally fits. Evidence had meaning, and it was beginning to tell the truth. Once the investigators had enough, things moved quickly. A freeze order on the shell accounts, notices to institutions, phone calls that used to be friendly suddenly grew terse and legal. Friends who had benefited from weekend getaways with Claire's card slid away like stones in a stream. The social world reshuffled itself, and she found new, unwelcome empty spaces in the places she thought safe. But the most satisfying turn, strange, quiet, almost petty in its perfection, was the way the town began to remember me differently. People who had once nodded politely now stopped me at the hardware store or the post office with questions. "Are you okay, Robert? I heard about the audit. Do you need any help?" There was no choir to my side yet, no triumphant parade, but there were hands reaching out. The human thing. That mattered, all the while Claire shrank. I watched her from the periphery, not with glee, but with the cold observation of a man cataloging the fall of something he had loved and lost. Her hair grew dull. The jewelry disappeared. Invitations stopped coming. She called once, her voice a high falsetto of panic, pleading for me not to go public, begging me to just stop this. I told her I wouldn't stop because stopping would let her keep her stolen life. She asked if I hated her. I told the truth. I felt nothing that simple. I felt cheated, bereft, and finally mobilized. When the DA filed charges, the headline in the small paper read like a bad joke. Local woman faces fraud charges. My name was there too, but as the victim, not the villain. It's an odd anchor to see your name in print in a different light. People read it over morning coffee and then looked up and saw the man behind the story, no longer a subject of pity, but someone who had done the hard work of reclaiming his life. Still, I knew not to celebrate. Pride is a dangerous currency in these battles. I kept my head down, crossed my T's, dotted my I's. The court case would be ugly. She would fight, call witnesses, shed practiced tears. She would brand me as bitter. I expected it all, but what changed on the inside of me was simple and profound. I had moved from reaction to action. I had someone to stand with me, my lawyer, a few old friends, and the truth. That, in the long run, is the kind of company worth having. In the quiet hours, when the TV hummed in another room and the motel AC kicked in, I would take out the stack of paper and read names aloud. This may sound strange, but speaking the ledger of betrayal gave me a sense of control. Names of companies, timestamps, amounts, spoken like a list of tools, no longer a litany of loss. It was moving from feeling to fact. Facts win cases. Facts clear names. Facts rebuild lives. The plan had shape now. We would move slowly, surgically. Subpoenas, accountants, testimony that could not be spun away. I would not wait at home for her to come with a script and a tissue. I would bring the evidence into the light where it could be weighed and judged. She had thought her money could buy her a life untouched by consequence. She had forgotten one thing. This community has teeth when pushed. It takes its own seriously. And so I sat in that motel room, surrounded by the evidence of my life and her deception, and I felt the small ember of peace. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't marriage fixed. It was a promise I would not let her ruin me. I would not let the man I had been be erased by someone who believed the world was her ledger. She used me for money, and in so doing she had given me the means to take her down. I would make her pay in full, not for the thrill of it, but because justice has a way of clearing the air so the living can breathe again. Tomorrow David would file another motion. The wheels were turning. The first domino would fall soon, and when it did, the sound would be loud enough for everyone who mattered to hear. When the court date arrived, the town seemed to hum with a curious electricity, as if everyone who had been whispering behind hedges and over fences finally had a place to stand and watch the truth be measured. I wore my oldest suit. It fit like comfort and memory, the cloth soft where my hands had polished it for years. I walked into that courtroom feeling oddly calm, as if the months of grind had steeled something inside me into something quieter and harder than anger, discipline. Claire sat on the front row with that practiced look of grief. Her makeup was done perfectly. Her hair gleamed. She was playing for the people who still wanted to believe in tidy stories. Around her were the few faces that had not fled, the ones who, for one reason or another, had chosen the wrong side early. I watched her for a moment, tracing the way she used a tissue, the measured inhalations she took to keep her voice steady. Then the judge called us to order, and the slow business of undoing a life began. David started by walking the courtroom through the map we'd built, account by account, transfer by transfer, invoice by invoice. He laid the broken trail out like a spine, vertebra by vertebra, and the room grew quieter with each step. A handwriting expert testified about slants and pressure points. A bank auditor described how shell entities were set up to obfuscate. A notary spoke about mobile signings that should never have happened at odd hours. The facts were precise, dull with their accuracy, no melodrama, just evidence. But sometimes the dullest things are the most lethal. At one point, Claire's lawyer rose to make an objection, his voice sharp and panicked, trying to sow fog where light had begun to gather. David answered with a legal calm that left no room for flourish. When he finished, he laid a single folder on the table, the backup files we'd recovered, the metadata telling the when and where of the drafts. The courtroom muttered like a sea shifting. I felt my pulse quicken as the judge read lines that proved intent, that mapped timing to opportunity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Claire's face changed. Not the theatrical change she'd practiced in living rooms and at brunch clubs, but something raw and then brittle. She looked like a woman who had been unmasked and had nowhere left to step. The mask fell piece by piece. A witness who could no longer stand behind a lie. A friend whose checks had been traced back to her phone. A credit line that collapsed into dust under scrutiny. Her supporters either studied the floor or stared at the exit. Nobody wanted to fraternize with the person at the center of bad accounting. When the prosecutor asked the direct questions about motive, about the way she'd set up the LLC, about the forged documentation, Claire's answers were thin and precise. She tried to put the weight of it on bad advice, on legal nuance, on having been desperate. Desperation, I thought, is a poor shield for preparation. The court noticed. People who had been charmed by her in the past now watched her like someone witnessing a slow-motion fall. The verdict that day was not sensational. The judge did not leap to the bench and bang the gavel for theatrical effect. Instead, he spoke in a measured voice that felt final because it was legal and careful. He found the shell entities fraudulent, the transfers improperly authorized, and the documents knowingly falsified. The result was procedural, a restitution order, the freezing of assets, the recommendation for criminal referral. But for all its administrative tone, the consequence bit. The house's deed was restored to me. Funds were ordered returned where possible. The town had to look at the paperwork and accept that the story told for so long by Claire was built on sand. After the hearing, people did what small towns do best and worst. They spoke. Some approached me with apologies that were clumsy and earnest. Neighbors whose heads bowed, old friends who looked like they'd swallowed a bitter truth. A few left casseroles and notes that said simply, "We're here." The human gestures of return were more valuable than any check the law could deliver. They were proof that lives could be repaired little by little. I accepted them quietly, because there is no place for festival when the wound is still raw. Claire, meanwhile, was quiet. Not the destructive quiet of plotting, but the stunned hush of someone who had discovered the full measure of consequence. She made no dramatic pleas, no last-minute theater. The plea bargaining began, the legal mechanics snapped into place. She agreed to certain terms to mitigate exposure, but mitigation is not immunity. The bank froze the accounts tied to the shell entities, demanding documentation that could not be provided without exposing the extent of her actions. Creditors came calling. Restitution was mandated in theory, though collecting vanished assets is an art of persistence and patience. The criminal referral moved a little slower, the wheels of the justice system grinding deliberately to avoid error. But when the district attorney took the case, the tone sharpened. Criminal charges followed: fraud, forgery, conspiracy. The paperwork began to paint a darker picture. The people who had once smiled at Claire's brunch invitations now passed on the other side of street. Pride is a thin coat when the elements come for you. There was a moment weeks later when I saw her on the courthouse steps, but not as she once had been. She leaned against the stone, the expensive shoes gone, the posture slumped in ways no makeup could cover. She looked like someone who had been stripped down to her essentials, a smaller person with the same face but without the confidence to wear it. When our eyes met, I didn't throw her a look of triumph. I watched the cracks. It felt neither clean nor glorious. It felt like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. In the months that followed, the practicalities of rebuilding took center stage. I had to sign papers, attend hearings, meet with accountants, and rebut panels of lawyers. I had to explain myself to people whose trust I'd once assumed. The house needed repair, not just the leaky roof or the frayed gutters, but the emotional architecture that holds a home together. Laughter, trust, the knowledge that the front door is a safe place. I did small things to reseal that architecture. I planted roses along the walk, fixed the porch swing, repainted the walls in a color that made the sunlight look kinder. It was domestic work, and it felt like therapy. Claire's downfall was less spectacular than people imagined. Her assets were tied up, and those who had helped her unwittingly felt the heat. People who had received gifts or favors began to distance themselves. Their apologies and rationalizations might have been sincere, or might have been survival. It didn't matter. The social currency she'd been spending was evaporating. She had traded steady for shiny, and the shine had left a residue of ash. There were moments of rawness. I received a letter from her, short, handshaken, an attempt at explanation or forgiveness. It was hard to tell. She wrote about the pressure she felt to be someone else, how the constant need to appear affluent had hollowed her out. She asked if there was anything I could do. My hands trembled when I read it, partly from the old habit of feeling for a woman I'd married, partly from the knowledge that mercy can be misread. Compassion and justice are not opposites, but they rarely coexist cleanly. In the end, I folded the letter and left it unread. Some apologies are for the apologizer more than for the person they wronged. To watch her reduced in fortune was a peculiar justice. The same town that once toasted her now murmured, and murmur turned into avoidance. She tried work, small jobs that barely covered rent. She wrote to ask if she could come by and pick up a few personal items I'd set aside. I left a box on the porch at dawn and walked away. There is a dignity in closure that doesn't need a confrontation to validate it. The courtroom drama fulfilled a kind of justice, but the real victory was quieter. It was waking up and not feeling the weight of betrayal as the first thing upon my chest. It was feeling comfortable at my own table again. It was my son, cautious, tentative at first, calling on a Sunday to ask if I wanted to join him for coffee. He did not lecture me. He listened. When a man at that age returns, the most meaningful gestures are the ordinary ones. A phone call, a shared meal, a neighbor mowing the lawn for no reason other than kindness. The financial repercussions for Claire were severe. Restitution orders, loss of credit, and a professional reputation that would never fully recover. She had gambled on a life that depended on others' silence and found the odds were stacked against her when the truth wanted to be told. I don't celebrate her suffering, but I do accept the fairness of consequence. You cannot hollow out another person's life without emptying a part of your own. I continued to work on the house. I painted trim in the slow, patient way of someone re-establishing territory. I fixed leaks the way a man patches up what's been torn open. Neighbors stopped by with practical offers. An electrician, a plumber, someone to fix a squeaky stair. Those small acts were like stitches being sewn into the wound. They were the testament that a community can be cruel, but it can also be kind once it has been shown the truth. Sometimes I think about what I lost besides money. The illusions, the naive faith that love and loyalty naturally coincide. Maybe that faith was foolish. Maybe it was essential. But what replaced it was not bitterness so much as a vigilance that I had earned. I learned to listen for the small mismatches in stories, to read receipts the way a carpenter reads grain. I learned that pride can be repaired with experience, and that caution is not the enemy of love. There were people who said I should have taken vengeance in a more theatrical way, ruined her reputation in headlines, aired everything on television. But that would have been noise. I wanted a life rebuilt, not a headline. The law gave me that scaffold, the community gave me hands, and time did the rest. Justice is often less dramatic than the movies, but it's more durable. Months later, I walked past the small shop where Claire used to buy trinkets. A woman inside glanced at me. Recognition flickered, then softened into an apology that didn't need words. I nodded and walked on. The days were ordinary, and ordinary was enough. I mowed the lawn and whistled off-key, like a man who had reclaimed a rhythm. There are nights I still wake with the old phantom pain, the sudden image of being deceived, of being laughed at from behind shopping bags, and in the dark I breathe through it. I am older now in ways that matter. The years have put lines at the corner of my eyes and a steadiness in my hands. I have not lost the capacity to love. I have learned to protect it better. As for Claire, the town learned to speak her name in the past tense. She found odd jobs and a small apartment where no one knew her history. She wrote once more, a short line of regret that landed like a leaf at my feet. I picked it up, crumpled it, and dropped it into the recycling. Some things are best composted into the soil and used to feed new growth rather than be kept on the mantle. When people ask me whether I feel satisfied, I tell them the honest truth. I feel lighter. Not joyful in the sense of triumph, but relieved. The weight that had been pressed against my chest, the coldness of betrayal, has been replaced with the steady pedestrian warmth of life rebuilt. I walk my street and know that the porch light is mine. I sit by the window and watch seasons change. I have time enough now to watch the small things grow, to rebuild trust slowly with the people who matter. She used me for money, and that choice set in motion a train that eventually derailed her own life. She miscalculated, as people who are arrogant always do. She forgot that money is paper, but reputation is a web that takes a lifetime to weave and a moment to tear. I did not celebrate her ruin so much as accept it as an accounting of choices. In the end, the ledger balanced. I did not seek humiliation as sport. I sought restoration. I got it slowly, through the court, through community, through time. I learned painfully that sometimes justice is not mere revenge, but the human work of setting things right again. So I live on. I fix the loose step on the porch. I make a better cup of coffee than I did before. I answer the phone when my son calls. I go to bed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from honest work rather than cunning. And when I look in the mirror, I see a man who was used, wounded, and ultimately rebuilt. She used me for money. I made her pay in full. Not because I wanted to watch her suffer, but because I wanted the life she tried to steal returned to me. The repayment was more than dollars. It was reputation, dignity, and the right to wake up in a house that I could once again call home.